Hey there. Okay, well, I thought I'd do another film review. This time for the 2021 version of Mortal Kombat, directed by Simon McQuoid, or however you pronounce that. I should say that I haven't played many of the games, or much of the ones that I have played, so there are some references that in the film that may have escaped me. For example, I only found out that it was Shinnok's amulet that Kano gets caught stealing in the temple after watching this film. Anyway, I hope you all like it. Okay, so first off, I should say that I wasn't quite sure how to do this review, whether to watch the 1995 version first or to just watch the new one and review it in isolation. In the end, I decided to watch the Paul Thomas Anderson one from 95 as well. And I think that it was different enough from the 2021 version that both films stand on their own, with the 95 version being more of a throwback to the martial arts films of the 70s and the ninja films of the 80s in its tone, mixed with some of the more self-referential humour that Street Fighter had, the Street Fighter movie in 1994 with Jean-Claude Van Damme, etc. There is one thing in particular, though, that I think they could have used from the 95 version in the 2021 film, but I will talk about that later. So, first the 95 version then. I did watch the 95 version, and it was enjoyable. There's a feel to the effects that made me think of Masters of the Universe, you know, that film with Dolph Lundgren in 1987. Christopher Lambert absolutely chews it up as Raiden, while everybody else hams it up and doesn't take the silliness of the premise too seriously, thankfully. Johnny Cage is the wisecracking comment on action heroes you would expect, really. You've got Scorpion and Sub-Zero doing their thing, not big characters in the 95 version. And the tournament to save Earthrealm is something akin to the tournament in Enter the Dragon on Hans Island. Some halfway decent fights. I think Cage versus Scorpion is my favourite. And the final showdown includes the Pit of Spikes from the game, which is a cool little touch. Apparently some people thought Kano was Australian in the film, but so much so that I believe they changed the character from being English to being Australian for the later games. The game's made after the 95 version, and he just sounds like a Londoner to me, frankly. And everyone has a good old time with some light-hearted fantasy, all set against the backdrop of Liu Kang's revenge against Shang Tsung for the death of his brother, and Sonia's revenge against Kano for the death of her partner. The main and only thing, really, that the filmmakers could be criticised for, in my opinion, was that they made the film PG-13, but it was written and shot in a way that wasn't a massive deal, I didn't think. I mean, they got the tone of it right, and it worked as a PG-13 film. As strange as that sounds, really, given that the games were so violent, the whole Streisand effect that came after it, etc., etc. Right, now skipping to 2021, the newest film in the series, we get a backstory for Sub-Zero and Scorpion, which is nice because it gives their rivalry some weight and scale as I said, they were rivals in the 1995 version, but it was completely glossed over. But then it worked because they weren't the focus of the film, really. After this, in the 2021 version, it starts to change. I mean, in the original film, it was essentially just a bunch of hard bastards fighting to stop the bad guys taking over Earthrealm. But in this one, they've put in the slightly ridiculous, in my view, conceit of being chosen by having a special mark or, well, it's a birthmark, essentially. I could accept it to a point, you know, if it works within the film, that's okay. But then we find out that if one of the people with the mark is beaten, just not in the Mortal Kombat tournament, but in their life, if they lose a fight, for example, then the birthmark passes from them to the person that beat them, and then they become one of the chosen, which I think was bullshit, but either way, that's the way it worked, and we end up with a group of champions. First, we've got Cole, who's a non-game character, basically crowbarred in to give the audience someone to identify with. He's born with a mark and is a descendant of Scorpion in the story. Then we have Jax, who's in the games, the guy with the big metal arms, who's a special forces soldier. He gets the mark from beating somebody on a mission in Brazil. Now, I've looked and I can't find out whether there is a Brazilian fighter in the games. But the way it's introduced, it does feel like it could be a reference to something in the lore. Not necessarily a character, but maybe something happened in Brazil in the lore somewhere. And then at this stage, the last person with the mark is Kano, who's Australian here rather than Cockney. And as I say, he's got the mark. And then you've got Sonia from the games, who doesn't have the mark, but she kind of is researching this tournament and kind of is the catalyst for many of the characters getting together before they get to Raiden's temple, etc. Then you've got Sub-Zero and Scorpion, obviously, who the film, to an extent, centers around Scorpion's journey. Well, not centers around it, but it's an important part of it. And there are a couple more characters from the game scattered throughout the film. Right, so as far as plot goes, Cole is brought on board by Jax, who then has a fight and gets completely fucked up. Cole goes off to see Sonia after talking to Jax about her before his fight. And we learn that there's this tournament called Mortal Kombat, where the fate of Earthrealm is going to be decided. So, in a sense, they'll be fighting people from other realms and planes of existence, and of different species, and etc. We find that Sonia has captured Kano, and things get out of hand when another of the characters from the game show up, and someone ends up using one of their signature moves from the games, which is quite cool, to be honest. I kind of like that. After this, Kano, Sonia, and Cole go off to the desert looking for Raiden's temple. Everybody's playing their roles well. I mean, Cole, who's the audience's character, is a bit confused as to what's going on at this point. Kano is very much the arsehole, as you'd expect. And Sonia is a kind of tough as nails special forces soldier who can stand toe to toe with virtually anyone. So pretty much they're characters from the game. They get near the temple and they are met by Liu Kang. And here we have the second potentially polarizing aspect of the film. And that is, we get the reason that the characters have got superpowers. Like Kano's eye laser and stuff like that from the games. We find out why they have these abilities. Okay, in the film, it kind of works to an extent. But, I can perfectly understand why a lot of fans of the game are going to absolutely hate it, because it doesn't need to be explained unless you write the story in a way that makes you explain it, which, unfortunately, is what they've done. Or, not necessarily unfortunately, but that's the tack they've taken. So we've got Liu Kang then, who tells Sonia and Kano and Cole basically what's going on, and he takes them off to see Raiden, who tells them that they don't have a lot of time to train, but they need to find these special powers, their arcana, as it's called, before they have a chance of taking on Shang Tsung and his minions from the Outworld realm. Shang Tsung and I think Sub-Zero, I think there might be a couple more with them, but a couple of Shang Tsung's minions show up with him. So Raiden basically seals the temple, and so that the champions can train, that's okay, that's fine. Then Kung Lao shows up, complete with his metal hat, which is kind of cool, and the training begins, and just before they start, we find out that one of the characters we thought was dead, or that might have been dead, is actually still alive and being healed at the temple because he's got the mark, and so he's a champion of Earthrealm, essentially, which makes him worth the effort. I think they say that they search every other realm trying to fix his body, which is a lot of effort to go to. So yeah, the training starts then, and one of the characters finds their arcana, their superpower, quite quickly. So soon after that, Cole gets a bit depressed. He decides he's had enough and goes home to his family. He's got I'm not sure whether it's his girlfriend and his wife, and she's got, I think it's a daughter. I think she's too young to be the sister, but I think she's probably the daughter. I can't remember at this point. It was a while ago since I saw it. Another character from the game shows up at Cole's family home, and bang. Cole absolutely leathers this guy and gets his arcana. He then, now that he's got his special power, he goes back to the temple to find that Shang Tsung and his crew have gotten in, mostly thanks to a heel turn on behalf of one of the champions. Unsurprisingly, really. I wouldn't call it a twist by any stretch of the imagination. Sonia then goes after the heel character, and the rest of them take on Shang Tsung's minions, and there's a load of special moves, including possibly my favourite from the game, which involves Kung Lao and his hat. And then Sonia comes back after beating the heel, and she's got the mark, basically. one thing leads to another, and Sub-Zero and Cole end up having a bit of a private fight, because it turns out that Sub-Zero has kidnapped Cole's family. So at this point, someone we've kind of been expecting for most of the film shows up to help Cole, and they basically take Sub-Zero down. Cole then rescues his family. Shang Tsung and Raiden show up, and nothing really happens. It's a big anticlimax, but the door is left open for the sequel, complete with a hint of a possible character that might be in the sequel. And the film ends, the credits roll, done. Right, so I can see why people were pissed off with the birthmark and the explanation for the powers to start with. I mean, they don't really make a lot of sense, but it kind of works in the mythology of the film rather than the mythology of the games, and I think they have to be seen as separate. The film is a different animal to the game, and it takes the setting of the game and then puts the story together in its own way for the most part. As I said earlier, though, there is one thing in particular that I think the original film does well that would have worked in this version, and this surrounds the character of Cole. Now, I can understand why they included him. They wanted a more realistic tone, and they wanted to use a non-game character as an audience surrogate, which would then potentially make the fantasy elements more believable, I suppose, in a way. But I think it would have been perfectly fine to use Johnny Cage again, and if they gave him the same motivation pretty much as they did in the 95 version and just tweaked it a bit. You know, you make him an ex-action star who now basically specialises in getting his ass kicked, and just let him find his arcana by embracing his fear that he was fake and just letting him draw his power from that. It would make him a perfectly serviceable audience surrogate for this type of film, I think. Especially if they added in his daughter from the games for the family peril element, which I think was a good thing in a way. But what spoiled it was that they weren't game characters. There was no real reason, in my view at least, for Cole to be there, when they could have used Johnny Cage and his daughter. The main reason to add a non-game character, I think, largely was to bring in an audience who weren't aware of the games and the lore, which shows a bit of a lack of faith, really, that the film could stand on its own merits. But I personally think it would have worked okay. I mean, it wouldn't have made that much difference, honestly, using Johnny Cage instead of Cole. And the story is universal enough that they didn't really need to add a non-game character to ground the audience in that way. So, but yeah, I mean, I enjoyed both the films, really, for different reasons. The 95 version was good for its throwback to classic films like the ninja movies of the 80s, or kind of almost like a parody of that kind of Enter the Dragon type of film. And frankly, you know, it was self-aware enough to know that it was silly, and it took that and revelled in it for the most part, which I think really worked, particularly given that it was a PG-13 film. In the 2021 version, I think it's good that they did go for a more realistic tone, using Sub-Zero and Scorpion and fleshing those characters out. I say realistic tone, but I mean, it's relative. It's a fantasy film. So, you know, you've got to bear that in mind when you watch it, that there are elements of realism in it, but it's not realistic then. But if you like this kind of film, I would check out both the 95 and the 2021 version, because they've both got something to offer, frankly. I haven't seen Mortal Kombat Annihilation, but I understand that it's terrible, so I've kind of skipped that because life is too short, really. But yeah, so that was my review of it started out as a review of the 2021 version of Mortal Kombat, but it references the 95 movie quite a bit, so it's more of a discussion, I think, really. And as I say, if you like this type of film, then both versions are worth watching, in my opinion. I mean, if you love the games and you're an absolute die-hard fan, the birthmark thing and the explanation for the powers in particular, I think, could well piss you off. But, if you can sort of get over that, then it's a good time, in my opinion. It's fun. It's a fun movie, and it does what it set out to do, above all, which was to be different to the 1995 version and to change the tone significantly enough that you get a different feel of the franchise. Anyway, so as I say, that's that. I hope everybody's doing well, and as always, and with all of the above being said, please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will speak to you all soon. Bye for now.